So, on to the next panel, which is in partnership with Shell Fleet Solutions. I'm going to invite all the panellists to come up onto the stage now, please. Take a seat. And then I'm going to hand over to Ewan, who will just seamlessly keep walking. Ewan Moyer is the Head of Fleet Solutions at Shell.
Great. Good morning. So yes, my name is Ewan Moyer. I'm the Head of Fleet Solutions in the UK for Shell. We have an excellent panel session today that will discuss the opportunities in transitioning fleets towards lower carbon solutions. At Shell Fleet Solutions, we've been working with all market segments of fleets for over 60 years. We understand the complexities of a fleet manager. You could be the MD, the CEO, and the environment manager all in one role. Now, as you are continuing to manage your daily activities, you're exposed to wider challenges like decarbonisation targets in a complex economic climate. Our latest research conducted with Deloitte shows that 95% of fleet managers see electric vehicles as a long-term solution for emissions reduction. Based on this, adoption is set to increase rapidly, with 54% of fleet owners expecting EVs to make up 90% of their fleets by 2030. But it's not just about bringing the vehicles themselves into your fleet. You also need the right charging ecosystem for your location, sufficient energy capacity being available, and reliable technology to manage your infrastructure and drive efficiency across your operations. Shell Fleet Solutions are aiming to be the #1 business mobility partner within the fleet industry, providing customers with access to premium grade fuels at Shell stations as they transition to decarbonise their fleet, and access to a growing EV ecosystem of charging at depots, workplaces, homes, and on the go. Momentum for us is key. We will continue to work with the industry in transitioning. It's an industry effort, and we need to collaborate to make it a success. Please join me in welcoming the panel as we discuss these opportunities in transitioning fleets towards lower carbon solutions. Thank you.
Thank you, Ewan. So I am going to just introduce the rest of the panel. So next door, we've got Anthony Humble-Smith, the Group Sustainability Lead for Gregory Distribution Limited. And then Vicky Crossway, the Country Manager for Commercial Road Transport at Shell. And finally, Maurizio Romano, who is the Head of Fleet at G4S. Maurizio, can I start with you? We know electric vehicles are the future. We know it's happening. Fleet is definitely, as we've discussed, is driving the kind of lion's share of the market at the moment. But what are the challenges that fleet companies are facing at the moment in this transition?
Okay, great question. First of all, I'd just like to say, I think I'm going to find this session quite cathartic because in the last sort of 3 years, I mean, I started out with a head of air and you can see the effect it's had. But no, seriously, the challenges are, you know, anything that relates to change is a challenge, but certainly in my 30 years in the industry, I've never known such friction. And there's lots of reasons for that, which I'm sure we'll head into. And it's sort of overcoming those challenges. But I guess they are very common challenges that we all know about in this room. So range, it's not good enough. The cost, the infrastructure, and so forth. And all those are overcomable. And, you know, what we've done in G4S, and by the way, we operate in the UK and I over 3,000 vehicles, is try to put a really sensible plan together to overcome all of those challenges. And that's about being clear in terms of what our expectations are, but looking at things pragmatically. There's a lot of emotion around EV transition. So the approach we took was clinical but sensible. And that was to just look at the types of vehicle we had and take a real sensible approach in terms of what we converted or what we're able to convert first. I guess it's in around feasibility. We set out, first of all, to ensure that we understood our baseline. So what is it? What's our current CO2? Again, what vehicles we convert, but also changed a lot of things by way of policy. And I can tell you now that, and again, it's been a real learning curve for lots of people. We've had some great adoption. Our first sort of, if you like, quick win was around sort of company cars, and we're just over 40% of uptake now, which is great. So that's almost in a place where we need to keep an eye on it, but it's in what I would say a BAU state, business as usual. We're now in the realms of other challenges, so it's a program, it's an ongoing thing whereby the lighter commercial vehicles and heavies are becoming more of a challenge. So it's less of a proposition from a TCO perspective. So certainly on cars, our position was cost neutrality. We achieved that. We're not definitely seeing that in LCV. It's a lot more of an expensive proposition. And I know we're going to talk about it later, but heavies is, we're limited massively by way of options at the moment.
Vicky, could I bring in the Shell perspective?
From the heavy duty side?
Yeah.
Yeah, so the heavy duty industry is in a much more difficult transition phase because there's not a lot of options for them at the moment. And the OEMs are bringing the vehicles to the market. So you have the Scanias, the Volvos, the DAFs. They are transitioning there. That is actually starting to bring up a bit of a curve, a steeper curve than what we had initially. But I think also the infrastructure needs to go hand in hand. And I think where the difficulty is getting the two to match at the same time of when things move into the marketplace. So when the infrastructure will be there, because you can have the vehicle, but if your infrastructure's not there, the vehicle's stationary, right? It doesn't go anywhere. So you have to look at options on the go. And you also have to look at working with partners, customers, around their own depot setup, because the depot infrastructure will be quite important as well. If you look at the UK market today, I would say 80% of the market is for heavy duty is home base, as we call it, the e-depot kind of space, for just our traditional fuels with diesel, and 20% on the go. What you'll start to see in that transition coming forward is around 60%, maybe more e-depot, and 40% more on the go, because it's not so easy to set the infrastructure up in the depot as it is just putting in a tank, like you do diesel. That infrastructure needs to be dependent on the capacity and the availability of what's within that depot location, so the grid capacity, what upgrades would be needed to do that. So it's not an easy transition and it's not a quick one. And what we have to do is we all have to work together hand in hand to make that transition smoother. It's never going to be perfect, but definitely smoother in getting to where we want to go.
Anthony, you've got sustainability in your title. Yes. Challenges, friction points from your perspective?
Yeah, absolutely. I think so the Gregory Group operate 1,200 heavy goods vehicles, so it's a challenging space to decarbonise. As Vicky said, we are headquarters in Cullompton and Devon. So the infrastructure that we have available on our sites is limited. It's not as easy to tear up the ground and just put in these fast chargers, because the DNOs and the availability of the juice on sites just isn't there for that. So I think there are two main challenges that we face when we're trying to electrify our fleets, and that is the availability and reliability of chargers. We need to make sure that when a driver returns back to base after completing a duty cycle, that vehicle can be turned around and ready to go in an appropriate amount of time. Or when a long-haul driver takes his 45-minute break, that he's able then to charge the vehicle and get back into the vehicle so they can continue on their path. And then the second challenge that we see is around how do we finance that transition? It's important that we grow as an environmentally friendly business, but also as a profitable business as well. And it's about how do we manage that on cost. An electric HGV in place can be twice the cost of a diesel HGV. And then who pays for that? Do we pass that on to our customers? So it's about playing with the finance models, looking at how we manage the on cost in our own fleet. So we make sure that our customers are able to pay for any on cost that we have to pass on to them, and that we can grow as a profitable business.
Great. Ewan, from the other part of Shell's perspective.
No, and I think, coming back to what Maurizio said there, obviously we see that a lot with our customers on the company car side, traditionally going with that first. It's very accessible. It makes sense from a finance point of view. The challenge then comes for LCVs and HGVs. And from our perspective, we're working a lot on the infrastructure side, clearly, supporting at both depots, but also on the go. So our public charging, that's not just rapid charging that we'll see on forecourts or at destination sites, but obviously Ubertricity as well from an on-street perspective. So, the likes of G4S and others, it's giving them that access to that one card. We heard earlier, I think, it was in a retail capacity, having multiple cards, still having that need to have that to access all the networks. So from our perspective, we're very keen to work with the industry from a roaming perspective, to enable us as our own infrastructure grows, to give customers that access to one card, one payment. It's ease of use as well, which we'll come on to later as a benefit that probably doesn't get talked about enough.
Yeah. We talked about it earlier. The government have certainly put onus on private sector to accelerate the transition. So how do each of you see your roles in supporting the industry? What can you do from your specific kind of companies? Vicky, should we start with you?
Yeah. So from the heavy duty perspective, we've taken an acquisition play with SBRS, which is one of our hardware providers, and we're now becoming more and more integrated internally within offering a one solution with the hardware, the software, everything that goes with that package. As part of the on-the-go infrastructure, I think the key thing that we need to look at is what's going to match with the vehicle availability. So at the moment, you can charge at 350 kilowatts with a heavy-duty vehicle, with a view that we future-proof those sites for 1 megawatt charging, which is coming later. Probably in the next few years, I would say that the OEMs will have the 1 megawatt charging capabilities. They're working that now in their pilot schemes and what they're trying to move towards in the next few years. But that's what Shell will do on the go. So we will look at both 350 kilowatt and 1 megawatt where we can. Not every site will have 1 megawatt charging because it may not have the district network operator, and the capabilities on those sites may not be available to allow us to future-proof for 1 megawatt. But that is the aim, is to ensure that we can have as many of these future-proof sites going forward. And then on top of that, when we look at the e-depot space, we come with a turnkey solution. So we work with the customer, we explain what needs to happen. We will talk to the district network operators on their behalf. We will look at the whole infrastructure that they need based off their duty cycles, because I think that's also important, is to take into account the vehicle that the customer is purchasing, the duty cycles that are associated with that, and the breaks, natural breaks that they would need to take in that journey, which is the 45-minute break that Anthony was mentioning before. And then basically pull together an optimization setup on the depot that will allow the customer to look at how they do their duty cycles in a normal way, but also optimize it on when they should charge, when they shouldn't charge, how to get the best out of that asset. So if you like, sweating the assets is the way that we would go. So we're going to need both. You can't live without one or the other. Both are going to need to be there, unfortunately, in this space for EV. But that's what we'll try to do with customers.
Anthony, would you like to come in on that one?
Yes. We see our role in the industry as a bit like the chicken and egg. So no one wants to build chargers if they've got no customers, no electric HGVs to come in and use them, and no one wants to buy electric HGVs if they're going to sit stationary because we can't charge them up. So what's particularly important for companies like Gregory's to do now is to form those strategic partnerships, to commit to the change and embrace the new era of transport and distribution. It's far too easy to sort of put it off, especially with the government putting targets further back now, that it's easy for companies, particularly with challenging fleets, to say, well, we'll deal with that in 5 years' time. But we're seeing pressure from our customer, particularly blue chip customers. They're saying, we have an agenda to decarbonise our Scope 3 emissions, and transport usually plays a huge key role in their decarbonisation journey. So it's about us being a strategic partner for our customer to make sure that we offer a solution of decarbonisation, but obviously embracing those strategic partnerships in our suppliers to make sure that they have confidence that the money that they're investing in fast chargers on the road and in the depot, that when the time comes, we are going to be in a space to embrace that change.
So the mandate change, actually, carrying from our last panel, probably means little for you, and it's not like you're going to stop what you're doing.
No, absolutely not. In fact, the target for 44 tonnes stayed the same at 2040. But to be honest, it's the primary driving force is what our customers expect of us. They want to see green logistics solutions, and we want to be the go-to provider to offer that.
Maurizio, would you like to share your thoughts?
Yeah, look, I mean, we are at the epicentre of lots of things. We've got, a pull from the clients, we've got a pull from the business. So I guess the part we need to play is to spread the word, right? And that sounds almost religious, but it's such a seismic thing for the industry. And I do think it helps in particular where experiences are shared. For sure, certainly helped in our story. We're nowhere near, the end of that journey yet, but we're certainly on the right track. So one of the points I'd like to make is our book is open, and a lot of the activity that we have around our Scope 3, for instance, planning is we share with all of our sort of top suppliers around Scope 3, our Scope 1 and 2 initiatives. So we're, and we can see that in those discussions and those collaborations, we're sharing what we're doing, the good bits. But the other thing that, maybe I should have mentioned right at the beginning was that the education around this is huge. Whether it be, personally, and a story I like to tell, very short stories around how many people at that level, and I won't mention names because it's not good for one's career, but I've had to explain the company car taxation, not as I'm an expert, but how it works, and that actually by having an EV, and we shouldn't be afraid of sharing this, right? It's equivalent in some respects of a pay rise. So again, all bundled, I think it's sharing the good, the bad. It's, you mentioned it earlier around sort of, we'd be absolutely open, not that we've got a massive estate of charging units, but certainly, a closed loop. And I think that should come about later on because, we've got, a fleet of ambulances. We can't really afford to have patients on board whilst charging. So, having those assurances and different solutions around how we charge, I think, is the next level. And then the final thing for me is really pushing the government to do more, particularly around the heavy space, yeah.
What would you like to see the government do in that space specifically?
Well, we know recently there's been the great news around the investment, the 200 million investment. So that's obviously a big tick and it's highly welcomed. But I guess there's more around, learnings from the car space, car LCV, in as much as, is there a hybrid solution on trucks? Question mark, range extenders. We seem to be just aiming for nirvana, and actually, is there a, is there a position, a phased position, a stepping stone that we can get to? The other bit is around as we start to look at electrification across the heavy fleet. Obviously, we know that battery technology is moving at a pace, but it's always going to be a heavier vehicle than an existing ICE. You know, I'd be urging the government in the next 3 to 5 years to start looking at weights and dimensions to therefore fit into the current ICE model, you know, the diesel model. So there's a lot that can be done there, and I do think, you know, we have to take some comfort in, I think, not the journey, but the whole experience is started. You can see the uptake. You can see, you know, 2 or 3 years ago, we're sort of looking outwardly at ranges and hoping that they would increase. Likewise, the infrastructure for charging, and thank the Lord, you know, we have got there. So the faith is there, it's building, but we do need to pull certainly the government along with us for sure.
Ewan, from your side of...
I was just going to say as well that, you know, I think it was on the slide from your colleague earlier, you know, it was 30,000 chargers have been added publicly in 19 months, and you know, that's a great start for us all to be working towards. And you know, from our perspective, you know, Maurizio's talked about that there. You know, the infrastructure itself, yes, there's the public side of things, so obviously our forecourts, and making investments there. We're also looking at that from a destination point of view. We mentioned Uber-Tristry from an on-street, but we also support on home charging, on workplace charging as well. And then bringing that together for a fleet manager in one place is where we see our role from, you know, supporting on that infrastructure rollout. It's often something that's overlooked, you know, that actual administration task. And as I mentioned earlier, you know, there's a lot of hats that are worn by a fleet manager, and it's difficult, and that's really where we see our role in supporting and taking that burden away.
And you talk about bringing those different aspects together. Is there like a worked example that you could share as to sort of what that could look like?
I mean, I don't want to keep passing it to Maurizio, but with G4S.
I think it's quite interesting to hear from...
Yeah, sure. As I said, it just depends really on what those quick wins are, right? So we talked about company car journey, supporting on home charging, for example, may then look at workplace charging. And I think, again, coming back to a different panel earlier, it's the use case and need of that fleet. It's not going to be a one-size-fits-all. So that's our sort of expertise in really bringing on, you know, the team that I sort of look after, but also much broader into Shell, that really can help customers understand, okay, where should we look at first from an infrastructure perspective? So, yeah, I mean, G4S is one example, but we have others as well. But I don't know, Maurizio, if you want anything to add to that?
Look, needless to say, you know, the suppliers that we use, right, and again, we've got a great relationship with Shell, including the OEMs, all form part of the success journey, right? So, as far as we're concerned, that's a given. But you know, our future proofing takes into account the offerings that we've got from Shell for sure, yeah.
Great, thank you. We've got a few minutes left, and I'll open up to the audience again. Does anyone have any questions? Sorry, I'm just going to squint. Oh, right at the back. Thank you for waving, because it is very dark out there. Yeah, that's very true.
Hi, Paul Kirby. I listened with interest around the public charging scenario. The public charging scenario is improving dramatically, but it is not fit for purpose for a commercial fleet, typically. In terms of an accessibility point of view, you can't get vehicles in. But then you've also got the total cost of ownership model that Maurizio mentioned there, that where you're paying 2 or 3 times the cost of private energy, a home energy. And we know that van drivers in particular can't take those vehicles home in many cases, and they're having to rely on local public infrastructure. What does the panel think that we need to do more of to make that element, this middle element of vans, as we move towards trucks, and trucks going back to e-depots and different things like that, the vans are not so simple. How are we going to solve that problem, and particularly around the total cost of ownership?
Yeah, I'm happy to go first. I mean, obviously, the vans themselves, right? I think Auto Trader published something very recently in terms of new EV sales into vans are still at around 5%. I think the BV RLA, if that's how you say it, was saying that actual use of vans, specifically in, let's say, like a G4S example, still have some way to go to actually working as a traditional ICE vehicle does. Again, from our perspective, it's just about, is there other opportunities to look at other than just rapid charging? So we talked about on-street charging with the likes of Ubertricity, utilising data that we get from our fleet customers around where do we deploy that charging next. Another option could be workplace charging, again, to bring that cost down. I think it was Nissan again earlier, mentioned that they don't charge at home, they just charge at their workplace because it's cheaper. So that is where that kind of total broader infrastructure coming together can play its role in trying to make it more accessible for LCVs as they go through that transition would be my take on that.
Anyone else like to contribute to that question? Otherwise I'll open up. Okay.
Yeah, I think, sorry, there's a really simple answer, and that is that we need to, grow that area, and you're absolutely right, by the way. But the one thing, again, that should have mentioned at the beginning was around looking at, particularly on LCV, taking a sort of similar approach to we did on the smaller vehicles, whereby we're clustering now lower mileage operations and being able to really get to a sensible TCO, right, comparable, where we've got vehicles purely on those operations. Yeah, it's another dynamic, it's another filter that buys us a little bit of time. It buys a little bit of time and enables us to step up. But what that does, it really has a reliance upon charging at base, yeah, particularly as we're talking cash in transit vehicles here. But in answer to the question, we need to see a lot more growth, and I know there is plans to within the LCV and HGV sort of charging arena for sure.
Great. I think we've got time for one more question from the audience. Anybody? Oh, just over there at the back. There's a microphone coming down, I think.
Hello. Hi. Yeah, my question was for the guys from Shell. How do you demonstrate... Sorry, can you hear me okay? How do you demonstrate... Is it working?
Sorry, we can hear you.
Sorry.
We just can't see you.
How do you demonstrate to us as an audience that you guys are serious about the transition away from fossil fuels when Shell are investing in, lobbying and investing in delaying the transition away from fossil fuels? Sorry, I'm not a great public speaker.
I mean, just to answer that question, we absolutely are investing in the transition, and I think we have to recognise at the same time that, and I see this often in conversations with customers, they want to do that and we want to support them on that journey, but they have the here and now, and there is still a need for fuels, and you can't get away from that fact. But from our perspective, whether that is in public charging, the acquisition, as I mentioned earlier, about Ubertricity for on-street, we've been working with fleets in home and workplace charging for nearly 10 years, and from our perspective, there's no change in terms of that transition and supporting that. So, but to be upfront, we have the here and now too, and there is that transition that needs to take place. And we're very vested in making sure that we're part of that with the likes of our customers going through that process.
Great, thank you. I think there was one final question just over there. Thank you.
Hi. So as our friend Michael down there probably knows, Tesla and BP just signed a deal for $100 million to buy superchargers. I thought that was quite surprising. Wondering if you have any hot takes or there's any sort of other discussion about pairing with OEMs to provide hardware or...
I can't give an answer on that. I'm speaking on behalf of BP and Tesla. Maybe you want to ask Tesla, they're in the room.
Might have to wait for the lunch break for the answer for that one. We are bang out of time for that panel, but thank you very much, everybody, for joining us.